Hey everybody, welcome to Each Channel News. Great time of year again as we go through the 2023, what happened, and 2024 some predictions with Jay McBain. I don't even know, we've been doing this now for quite a few years. I mean, it's like 5 years. We should probably track this or something.
We
But
probably should. This is it's quite the series.
yes, I think this is our longest running series now. And it's always great to kind of figure what's going on and how you found this year and what kind of things you think is going to be happening next year. But let's kick this off. So, Jay, I mean, you've been traveling like crazy. I mean, I'm not going to introduce you. I mean, people know you pretty well. So, Jay McBain from Canalys, in case people don't know what you guys are doing, is an analysis over there, and you've been there for quite a couple of years now. Is that right?
Yeah, just 18 or 19 months now. So
there you go. And so, you follow the numbers pretty closely. You've been going to God knows how many events you've been speaking at, but let's start there. What exactly, how many events did you speak to this year, by the way?
I think I did about 75. There's 218 channel events around the world every year, and that's with hundreds of people or more. There's thousands of road shows and other things in addition to that. But yeah, I choose to, the big events, the Microsofts, the AWSs, the Dreamforces, the Google Next, and things like that, where you have 65,000 people in the room. We have obviously major other events, but community events and other things. Try to do a real mix, get a good set of partners to talk to and get a sense globally. Just got back from Bangkok and Barcelona and other places, just getting a sense for where things are at.
So when you look at events out there, I mean, there's, like you said, over a couple of hundred events right now happening in the world. What are some of the things that you think are events that are good? What are some of the things that you're looking for in events beyond the actual 65,000 type of audience that attends?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously different style events. I mean, when 65,000 people are there, you're kind of rushed into a room and you feel like a little bit of a number and things like that. And people are there a little bit for the the pomp and ceremony and stuff. And CES is coming up in a couple of weeks here, and was always the Comdex where 1 million people would go to Vegas, and that's when vendors are spending all kinds of money, $1 million to be there, plus throwing fun parties and stuff. But the best events in our industry are smaller. You run many of them, Julian, where people get into those hallway conversations. They stay up late at the hotel lobby bar. The content on stage is really written and read for them. It's not rehearsed by some CEO that flies in on a private jet and 5 minutes after that speech are off on the private jet going back home. Those are the ones that have always been important. I go back to 1981, when Apple started in those small little computer clubs. I got to speak to many of the channel leaders at Apple yesterday, and I reminded them that when Wozniak and Jobs took that wooden Apple IIe, that was literally the garage. And how did they start the company? And how did Bill Gates, going to these little computer clubs, and it was grassroots, and that's always been our industry. And when companies get too big for their britches, private equity is obviously a big story, and you don't go far in social media before partners start looking at these vendors who have become too big and too structured and stuff, and they long for those family businesses. Yesterday, I posted the market shares for example, in managed services. What is the market share of a ConnectWise, and then now a Kaseya Datto combination and an Enable and stuff. And the smaller firms are actually doubling their growth because there's this feeling that, I want to get back to that family business again. When Arnie and Bob used to fight and have security escort people out of rooms and stuff. And those were the times where you felt the vendor was an entrepreneurial, kind of like you. And it gets to a point where when some company sold for $6 billion to another one of those big firms, they're like, what, is there another family business around that, can be more like me?
Yeah, there's a distance obviously that happens. I mean, it takes all kinds to make the world go around, but I find sometimes they're in their ivory towers and they're become disconnected with the actual channel community, and they're rushing into the next automated way to actually, automate everything apparently. And maybe that's a good thing eventually, but we shall see. So what did you learn from all of these events that you've attended? What's the one or two things that you have learned?
Yeah, I mean the story of 2023, and it was such a big story that you or I didn't talk about it 12 months ago,
Yeah.
was generative AI.
Mm.
And every one of the 218 events was led by kind of generative AI and this generational technology that's going to change everything. And you have half the people on Earth thinking this is Skynet, that we've turned it on, and Terminator 2 is going to come back. And people are writing letters to governments and things. So it was a consumer trend first, where ChatGPT, then Bard at Google, and people started to see, oh my goodness, this is something. The version of ChatGPT people first used, 3.5, could, for example, pass the bar exam, but it passed the bar exam in the bottom 10 percentile, but it still passed a pretty tough test. My daughter wrote the test this year too, and it's not an easy test to write. But then the next version of ChatGPT that came out a month later got in the top 10%. And the version of ChatGPT they're working on now is going to be able to write the bar exam. So it's this progression exponentially of, oh, this is a fun tool, but oh no, this is perhaps bigger than this. And maybe this whole idea of AI and this general AI idea that maybe it's more than a co-pilot, took over everything. It took a few months for business to kind of look at this and say, what is that co-pilot? And that was really led by Microsoft. Google has come up with not only Bard at the beginning, which is more the consumer side, but in the last couple of weeks with Genesis, that really explains the foundational layers. But at Canalys, we came up with a number that $15 billion of services was driven this year around generative AI, the consulting, some design, architecture, some early language models, some we'll call tuning of those models, but a lot of it was just around the infrastructure and things like that to get a pilot going with a customer. But that's going to grow to $158 billion. So it's material by 2028. It'll grow at 59.2% compounded growth. So like any other opportunity that grows that fast, we've got to keep our eye on it. The fact of the matter is, out of the gate, there's not really a managed services opportunity. There's nothing you're going to sell every 30 days forever at this point, other than some of the increased hardware. One of the things that popped out really quickly, again, at Google Next, at Microsoft Inspire, at AWS reInvent, was 85% of the world's business data sits on premises. And there's no CEO of any trillion-dollar company who's confused, that thinks we're going to somehow forklift all that data back into some public cloud somewhere. The public cloud, by the way, all their data centers are full. They're running at capacity. They're at the point around the world where utility companies, electric companies, are limiting their usage, and they're taking up more fresh water. For example, year over year, Microsoft grew their fresh water consumption to cool down these data centers by 34%. You have places around the world now, a good example is in Uruguay, where people are protesting because there's not enough fresh water for the population to drink. And they're protesting to say, hey, shut down the water that's going into these data centers. So this is just these early moments of a massive compute and storage generation that we're getting into. But if 85% of the fun is going to be at the edge, that's where managed service providers, that's where VARs, that's where traditional system integrators and others sit. And so the opportunity there to do the work, go and connect yourself with data platforms like Snowflake and Databricks and figure out data warehousing, data lakes and things. You don't have to be the large language model genius for that particular customer, but there's a lot of work around it that we think is going to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of people now, for sovereignty, right, for your information, your data, in-country data, right, they're saying, wait a minute, we don't want our data floating around there, right? So a lot of people are getting back to the hybrid model, I guess, and trying to figure out what do we keep on premises, what do we, go to the public cloud with. So that debate is definitely going to be heating up as we move forward. When, as you mentioned, right, that AI was something that we didn't really even talked about. I mean, I first got a glimpse when my tech guy said, "Hey, Julian, I want to show you something," and he shared his screen and he showed me ChatGPT and what it was doing back in last November, and I said, what is that? What is that? Like, what is that?" And I thought was something that they created kind of a knowledge base that they've been working on secretly without telling me. But no, it was like, and this is live for everybody, and it was kind of interesting that you could put stuff back, and you get stuff back out of it, and it's come a long way. Are you using AI in anything that you're doing these days?
I use it every day. So it's one of these things, being an analyst, I mean, we write a lot.
Mm,
And I'm going to say 80% of our writing, kind of goes into those, paragraphs on page 5, page 6, page 7 of a report
mm,
that 98% of people haven't got to or won't
mm.
get to. They don't get past the title or the executive summary. They don't get past the visuals and things like that. So, I think of a, interesting thing that's going on in the news. For example, in the last couple of weeks, we're watching California. You talked about sovereignty.
Mm.
Talking about a bunch of regulation that
Yeah.
looks more like Europe around how companies around sustainability
Mhm.
and ESG are going to kind of report on this. And this is, for the US is lagging pretty much every other advanced country in the world. But California is starting to push the envelope. And all of us know that California is the one that really pushed North America out of leaded gasoline. They're the one that got North American catalytic converters on cars. They're the ones, in the last few years have been telling us that we can't buy two-stroke lawnmowers and chainsaws anymore. So it's always been the state. And as a state, I mean, if you took it as its own country, it would be one of the, biggest, most powerful GDPs in the world, being at least the top 10 or 15. But as a state, it's got a lot of power. And as it starts to put these ESG related
Mm,
KPIs in front of companies,
mm,
not only saying nice things out in public and putting nice paragraphs on RFP responses, but
mm,
actually measuring and holding up to these numbers. A lot of it people see is the governor there, Gavin Newsom, running for president in 2028. And much like here in Florida, where I live, Ron DeSantis spent 4 years kind of putting in a bunch of stuff here that built his platform to run for president.
mm.
So people kind of think of this politically at this point. But as these laws get enacted, companies can't build technology for 49 states plus Canada and then have a California variant. Kind of like you can't build two kinds of cars for this market. Over time, you build for that lowest common denominator, and you have to build to, and you have to design everything around, where that regulation, the legislation, the governance, the compliance happens. And so as an analyst, back to your question, I say, ChatGPT, write me 1,200 words on how these changes in California, as compared to Europe and other things, are going to, advance these ESG goals. And then I go over to Bard and just cut and paste the question into Bard. I take two 1,200 word responses and I pass it over. We have a team of 3 in Europe that runs our sustainability group. And I've got these two 1,200 word things. And now we're actually faced, instead of a blank page, we've got somewhere that's gone and, collected all the data, collected the timeline, collected the news, like the journalism part of it. And then we have to obviously fact check because these systems hallucinate. We have to fact check that everything it said was right.
Mm,
But in the end, we have to add some Canalys data and some Canalys recommendations and tweak every paragraph to where it's, kind of stating where things are going and what people should do. But in the end, I wasn't spending dozens of hours going to go through reams and reams of regulatory,
yeah.
legalese. I had a system to do that. So it really is a system that can do that.
It saves a lot of time. There's a little joke that I don't know if I'm not funny, right? But this girl moves from California, from LA, to Texas, and the guy from Texas says, "Hey, you have an accent, you know? Where are you from?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm from LA, right?" And the guy goes, "Hey, welcome to America." Everybody's got their own little different worlds out there, and it's interesting. As a matter of fact, we did a compliance, a deep dive in compliance when we were in California about talking about all the laws globally, how it affects, and a lot of people don't get the fact that once you're playing in the global sphere, right? You are impacted, whether you're based in Texas or in California or New York or Toronto or wherever. These things will impact you. As a matter of fact, there's lots of international rules that is now talking about compliance and regulations, and there's hundreds of countries out there that's making sure that they're part of that discussion, because everybody wants to protect their data, right? And privacy issues are going to become, big, I think, and everybody's trying to busy putting up whatever they call these guardrails, whether it's real or not, around AI and so on. But it seems to me that the information is sort of a little bit loose, out there. I actually wanted to download a report from a company, and in the fine print of the report said, and by saying yes, you're authorizing us, you're allowing us to share your data. And it didn't quite tell me like how they're going to share my data. And I'm going,
Right.
isn't that like not legal? And anyways, these are things that I think is going to tighten up the language. So when
Yeah.
we actually go on, and even there's an article 25, I believe, in Quebec that's coming out that is going to impact a lot of folks, and that you not only have to collect data in a specific way, but you have to tell them specifically what you're going to be doing with the data, when you're going to be releasing the data. And I think you've got 30 days. And then you've got to, like, if you don't get the opt-in information, you have to delete that information.
Right.
And so you've got to go back. So uh, I think compliance and regulations is going to be 2024 is going to be a big year for that. What are you seeing from compliance and regulations? It's starting to get a little bit of bite now, right? There's some rules and regulations and laws that if you don't regulate, they've put the guys, I believe, from SolarWinds, some handcuffs and so on. So they're getting a bit serious now, aren't they?
Well, they are. And, there's a few things happening at once. And a lot of the compliance stuff is, again, the US and by extension, Canada being laggards.
Mm,
The European Union has been very forward in terms of, bringing, for example, big tech and other things. The one thing they did earlier was GDPR, was this
yeah.
idea of tightening down what we could do from an email perspective, and what consent really means, and what checking that box for you, what that really meant legally. And then they enforced it with fines. And it could be a percentage of your company's overall revenue for the year. A percentage of that could be fined. And so this made everybody think differently. And even, I was in a small company raising money and, blasting out as many emails as I could, but it would have been material for us as well.
Mm,
And so these are the things that now Europe is doing that are spreading westward. The US has always been a little bit more capitalistic, always been a little bit more hands off. Um, but again, companies have to build for the world. You can't just build different products for different countries or places in the world. So all eyes on Europe. The other thing that's happened this year, and it's been a trend, but we kind of passed over that moment of convergence,
mm,
is this feeling broadly by the public about big tech. You've got these big trillion-dollar companies. There's 7 of them. But really, the start of it was social media, but broader, this feeling people have about the Googles of the world and Amazon, the feeling they have about Microsoft and Meta and
mm,
now Tesla and other things. So these trillion-dollar companies have turned from these wonderful places to work, wonderful things for society, to somewhat negative. The CEOs I saw yesterday all have kind of negative ratings at the moment, minus Apple.
mm,
Um, but this idea that now the government and regulators and even Supreme Courts and other councils and stuff have the public behind them. So, a week ago, Google lost a big um, piece in the US. And it was this monopoly. It was this, from the consumer side of their business, the advertising and, kind of the controls they have and breaking them up, in terms of the strength they have and owning search. But
Hmm.
other things around the App Store charges, by owning a platform, by owning a monopoly, the ability to make 30 or 40% margin and forcing people to sell. This was the Epic Games going up against Apple and Google. All of that's broken apart, but everything is done from a compliance perspective, really being led out of Europe. And UK maybe second, and now US regulators are, kind of catching up to their European counterparts. But I think this is probably one of those largest headwinds against these large tech companies continuing to do large tech things, and using that monopoly power, using platform power to their advantage. And it's not maybe good for the consumer at times when you're stifling competition, and when you're doing things, when we're the product on the internet. They're trying to get over that, not only with, the changes in GDPR and things, but now with the end of the cookie.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
kind of
a lot of
forcing.
those people, Jay, the marketplace is an example, right? I mean, Apple's had theirs forever and so on, and there's a big chunk of money, right, that you've got to pay when you play on that marketplace, right, as a developer, right? And you have no choice, right? In many cases, you don't even know who the actual customer is who bought your product. You just know it's been downloaded, and here's your, 30 cents or whatever it is, right? And I see that the big platform people, right? They're sort of controlling the game to a large degree. Do you think that there is room for pushback there, where people who are developers in particular saying, "Wait a minute, what am I really getting out of this gig?" I mean, you could argue that they're getting a market delivered to them in a silver platter, right? But maybe a third is a little bit much. Do you see, people playing that game a little bit better, the platform developers, to help the developers get a little bit bigger piece of that pie?
Yeah, I definitely do. And there's a huge trend I'll end on. But to start off, yes, absolutely. When Apple started Apple
Mm,
News Plus, and started charging, everywhere from the New York Times through Fortune and Forbes and through your local newspapers, had to pay a 40% tax to be part of that. And that was ridiculous,
yeah.
in terms of that. But uh, that's when this got all triggered. And then the gaming, the developers that you talk about, the millions of apps that sit on these app stores getting charged 30%. Again, that is, from an economic perspective, that is monopolistic power. But you're right. On the flip side is, you and I could build an app this weekend, and by Monday have it deployed on the Android store and the Apple store, and be in front of almost 3.5 billion people who, can go and actively download it. So yes, there's a market there, and there's obviously a benefit to be in that platform. But the double-edged sword of, losing a big chunk of your income, that's gonna settle down. And here's where the big trend is. 2 weeks ago at AWS reInvent, they were the third and last hyperscaler to drop their marketplace fees down to 3%.
Mm,
So on B2B, Microsoft did it 2 years ago. When they went from 20% down to 3. Google followed within 30, 60 days, and now AWS. And it's 3% or 2 or 1.5. I mean, it could go lower from there. But what they basically told the world, and they've told every end customer in business, those businesses and governments that spend $4.7 trillion this year on tech and telco, they've told them that the value of resell, taking a customer's money on behalf of another company, taking on the risk of non-payment, taking on the cost of time, cost of money, net 30, net 60, net 90, and then the cost of, sending out Biff to, break some knees to get the money at some point. The entire cost of that equation is 3% of the deal. And as consumers, we already know this. When we go and swipe our credit card at a restaurant or now for Christmas gifts, it's 3%.
Yep.
is what the store or restaurant has to pay as part of their revenue reduction for getting access to that massive payment system like Visa and MasterCard and things. So, we all now know in our hearts that in both in consumer and in business, the entire cost is 3. So now to every one of our vendor friends, and there's 35,000 vendors today that have channel programs. When you look at the history back to 1981, at IBM in the 80s, I mean, you were making 40% margins for selling a PC. Then it went to 30, then it went to 20, then it went to 10. And if you can make double digits today, you're laughing. But there's still other categories. Security, you can make 20 to 30% margins. But those margins are averages. And they were never meant to be just for the point of sale. It wasn't that we're paying you 30% as a partner to collect the customer's money and take on that risk. What we were paying you for is all the wonderful things you hopefully did in those first 28 moments before the customer made a decision. I hope you wrote that ebook and you recorded that podcast and you had that little event and you're on the board of the Chamber of Commerce and you did all those things to get that customer nudged towards us. I hope you did all the configure, price, quote, the consulting, the design, the architecture work, like you did it all. Then, at the point of sale, now that everyone is going into subscription consumption, the point of sale is only the first 30 days with the customer. Now I hope you do the implementations, the integrations, all the managed services. You're there every 30 days for the rest of time. So you get us a customer for life. So what we did is we took hundreds of moments and paid them and jammed it all into the point of sale with a bunch of hope as a strategy. And you never want hope as part of your strategy. But over the course now of 43 years, we've now determined that we're overpaying some partners. Those ones that show up at the last minute on our RFP. They bid $5 less than everybody else and they win the deal as the lowest price. And then once they've collected the money, they're gone in the night. So in a partner situation like that, they've probably earned 3% of value and you paid them 30 or 20 or whatever the margin structure is, front and back end. But on the flip side, you've got a whole set of partners out there that you win deals in your sleep. They do all the marketing, they do all the selling, they do all the engineering, they do all the long-term stickiness work, to keep that customer. So by paying them 20 or 30, you're underpaying them significantly because they've taken out all the SG&A costs from your company. So what if there was a better way to do that? What if I could measure, monitor, manage every one of those 28 moments and pay micro payments? Hey, that ebook, related, created this. Hey, that's $5. Hey, you ran that event and it turned into this and turned into that. Hey, that's $100. And started adding up where a partner could make 50% of the deal if they literally got you a customer for life. But that partner that just showed up at that last second and collected the money gets that 3%. And then everything in between is very, very specific. So that's the trend we're going on now. And it's a harsh reminder to a pure reseller that when they talk to a vendor, that's not 10, 20, 30%, because pure resell can happen now on a marketplace. Marketplaces are growing at 86% compounded. It'll be 45 billion by the end of next year. We've got now companies out there, 4 of them in the last couple of weeks, that have come forward saying they're running billion-dollar plus businesses through just AWS marketplace. So from CrowdStrike to Snowflake to Splunk to Zscaler. I mean, we got companies now issuing press releases. And we had predicted
$1 billion.
We predicted AWS, leading kind of the marketplace story, would be a top 10 distributor, joining the likes of TD SYNNEX and Ingram and Arrow and D&H and everybody else. They would join that crew by 2025. We think they might have already have. They don't break out those numbers, but it's about 5 or 6 billion to join that club. I think they're already there. If you just count up the dry powder at the 3 biggest marketplaces, AWS, Microsoft, and Google, they have $303 billion of future commits in the bank. And so when you look at our prediction of 45 billion, for 2025, I think that that's going to be beat as well. That's the pure resell. I mean, that's that 3% of the opportunity, but the vendor still has 27 or 17 or whatever their structure is to pay out all those other moments. And those get paid out through a marketplace. So partners that are active in these marketplaces can earn rich, and it's not margin, it's rich funding
Mhm.
in private offers and distributor offers and other types of things wrapped around the deal. So major, major trend. And now a number that everybody's facing, which is this 3% number,
Mhm.
is the cost of taking somebody's money.
Well, hopefully, when you had a chat with Apple people, they're thinking about moving from 30 to 3. I'm not so sure though that they're going to be easy to move, but you're right. I mean, there is a cap, right? And if the credit card people are taking just 3%, so let's just say it that way, you can
Yep.
pretty sure it's probably maybe 1%, and they just tripled it just to be sure. But when you look at the just to ramp up the compliance and regulations and this stuff issue, right? We always talk about these are things that is the whole world's got to comply to. But from a channel perspective, right? This is a sort of a blue ocean opportunity for them. Because if they get and understand what that means, right, they're going to be able to go to their customers, right, sort of explain that and help them become compliant. So this, for me, when I look at it, it looks like a revenue opportunity for them to sort of become the expert in compliance and regulations. And so their customers look to them to deploy this. What do you think about that?
Yeah, the immediate opportunity, I'll size it, is around security, obviously.
Yep.
The cybersecurity industry this year will touch $80 billion. That's the software and hardware. Today, partners are making on average $2 for every dollar of software and hardware. So while 80 billion is the number, we've got 160 billion dollars going on in services wrapped around it, making up the entire industry. Here's an industry also growing by solid double digits. So partners are asking, how do I go from making $2 for every dollar of software and hardware to making 3, to making 4? That next big move is compliance. And it's also a managed services because a managed service because
Mm.
compliance isn't a one-time thing. You don't grab everything together and by the end of the year, it's not like an audit where
Mm.
you do it and release your results. You got to make sure compliance is a moving target because, as I said, every government around the world right now is changing the game and moving the goalposts. And for a company that was compliant on a Tuesday is now at big risk on a Wednesday. And again, cybersecurity is moving so quickly. The threat vectors, the surface area, it's just such a organic thing that compliance is next to it. And it's an opportunity, number one, to keep your customer off the front page of the newspaper, keep them out of court, but also keep their business, protected and running and solid and making people that invest in that company and people that buy from that company more confident. It's one of those things that if you're trying to find that next dollar of services, if that customer's spending $100,000 on security, you can match that $100,000 divided by 36 in a managed contract over 3 years. But that's the compliance opportunity
Mm.
wrapped around every one of the security services we do out at the edge and data and applications and in cloud and other places.
We're going to jump into security a little bit later, but I wanted to, we talk about, how vendors are going to have to kind of help, change the way they compensate their partners a lot. There's a lot of discussions about it. Vendors are trying to figure out how to do it. Some have attempted to put a point program together to sort of give you different points for different things. So people are playing with the concept, but it's not easy to implement, is it, right? It's a little bit more complex because we're moving from a psyche of transactional rewards, right, to like, wow, there's a whole bunch of other things in the middle there that's moving the decision along. Do you see, first of all, do you see any vendors out there doing it right? And B, what do you think it's going to take to kind of get the community there so that the channel partners start benefiting from this this new way of thinking?
Yeah, this actually goes back to the conversation we just had on, what about those 28 moments? What about every moment after that? How do you
Yeah.
collect all these 100 moments, monitor and measure them? A couple of years ago, on this very particular conversation we're having, I kind of declared this decade of the ecosystem,
Yeah.
where it's not just about the transactional partners. That's very important. 73.1% of that 4.7 trillion went through partners. So the fact of the matter is it's an incredibly important part. And it's what we've been focused on for 43 years to make sure that that's solid, that we get the customers on the dance floor. But what we're figuring out now is we got to get customers to the dance. And we can't do it in the old school where we could just buy up cookie data from Google and Facebook and put a bunch of things together and get them there, or assume our partners are helping us. And then, in a subscription consumption model, we have to keep the customer dancing all night long. So every 30 days forever, we got to start doing that. All the point system really was, and Microsoft was the first to do it, is let's squish this a little bit and let's not assume that every partner is doing all these wonderful things. Let's start to measure those things. And the idea is if you're doing wonderful things, you're going to make more than you were making from Microsoft in the past. If all you're doing is resell, you're going to make much less. And so then 2023 became the year of the point system. VMware, HP, I mean, almost every month there was a major new announcement. And I remember being on stage announcing that with them, because this whole idea of promoting co-sell the same way you promote resell. It doesn't matter in the future how money changes hands. It can be indirect, it can be direct, it can be through a marketplace. It doesn't matter. It's such a small value item in the whole chain of value that the partners provide. So what if we could start measuring that better? And above me is this tech stack I build every year. 233 companies now rethinking how to do that. At the end of the cookie, how to measure those first 28 moments, how to match that data, how to attribute that better, how to build out better marketing systems that you can get visibility to those clicks and opens, both of you at the same time. Rethinking the entire model of sales and marketing around partnerships. When you can't buy third-party data anymore, you're going to rely on second-party data. And it doesn't matter. It goes beyond technology. Car companies have to partner better with the magazines and the people on YouTube racing Teslas. Every industry has to partner better. And now 82% of the world's CEOs are investing more in partnerships because of it. But partnerships go beyond co-marketing and co-selling. They go into now co-keep to keep that customer for life. They go into co-innovation and co-development. The average deal today in security is 7 layers deep. The average deal in SaaS, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, Marketo, NetSuite, HubSpot, is 7 layers deep. The average hyperscaler deal, that's AWS, that's Microsoft and Google, is 7 layers deep. The amount of innovation, hundreds of thousands of ISVs or SaaS companies today, IHVs, 800,000 IHVs in emerging tech, all competing now to get into those 7 layers. So this is a wonderful innovation story, co-innovation, co-development story. This is the story of the Apple Store that we were talking about and the cost of that 3%. But the Apple Store is what made Apple. It's an ecosystem company. The Google Store is what made, Android what it is. And that's why there's 2 major platforms, because all the world's developers can now narrow down, to building. And back in our day, 80s and 90s, you narrowed down and built for Windows first. You built for Mac second. If you had time, you went to Linux, but you never did. You went back to Windows. And that's what happens today, is a developer will develop for Apple, because that's where the money is, not the share. But then they'll develop for Google. If they have time left, they'll go do Tesla and they'll do a couple of these other platforms, but you never have time. So you get back to Apple again. So that's why platforms are so important. But in the end, that's kind of the world that we live in terms of these new programs. And that's what this year, again, we have 35,000 vendors that we talk to at Canalys. And that's topic number 1 right now. Is how do we better measure and monitor these partner activities, partner value, And how do we pay the better ones more? And you don't get the money from somewhere else. You don't go ask the CFO or the board for more money. They said no to Microsoft. They said no to VMware. I mean, they've said no for the people that already have it. You have to take the money from the point of sale.
Yeah. I struggle to keep up with just talking with 7,000, let alone 35,000. My goodness. It seems to me that there's a lot of companies out there, right? Developing stuff. And, there's a maturity level, right? A journey in the channel, right? And a lot of them is sort of like, oh my goodness, the channel is really great. Let me jump in there, that type of thing. They spin up their PRM. They put their 3-vector type of partner program in place, and boom, they think they're ready to roll. They've built it, and they will come. What do you think is the disconnect in the companies that are sort of getting into the channel right now? I mean, honestly, I kind of know the game really well, but I find that I don't have the energy to explain to them, why the world is actually round as opposed to, flat. And it seems to me that when we talk channel a lot, it's like you're educating people about getting into that channel and what it means to co-sell and develop a relationship and so on. And their perception is not quite reality. What's your take on that? And what do you think? How do we qualify a company who's actually channel ready, or channel aspirations?
Yeah, this is why people ask why I print posters behind me, because I have this conversation, I think 16 times a day. And I start off the conversation with one stat. And the stat is this, and it doesn't come from me, it comes from McKinsey, the consulting company that's consulting the boards and CEOs of the Fortune 500. They're telling the biggest of big companies, this is the deal now. This is why 82% of CEOs are investing more in partnerships. Your customer, on average, has now 7 partners they trust. 7. So the idea is they're not the 7 same type of partners. They don't just have 7 MSPs come in and battle it out, in front of them. It's 7 different kinds of partners. So the number 7, if you look at the second chart, there are 20 different kinds of partner types now. Every company in every industry is coming in to be a tech company. 78% of marketing agencies are now tech services firms. 81% of accountants are now tech services firms. Everybody's coming in from that side. We have hundreds of thousands of cloud consultants. Like a Salesforce has 220,000 partners, which are consultants. None of them collect the customer's money because Salesforce is direct. And then on the left, you've got all kinds of system integrators and everything else. So there is a mass rush of millions of companies, tens of millions of people across 20 different business types that are competing for those 7 shares. That's the channel. And if you don't want to call it channel, because channel is short for channel of distribution, call them partners, call them alliances, call it your ecosystem, call it whatever you want. But your goal is to have those 7 people know who you are, know enough to be dangerous, and then hopefully endorse you and not cause friction. So that's the kind of the gravity of the situation. When you ask the question, what's the blind spot? It's not about the program. When you start shoving 35,000 programs together, if you're selling security today, there's 6,500 companies that have a channel program. Do you think you're going to differentiate across 6,500 or even have the time or air in the room to talk about it? Not really. A program is kind of a me too, and there might be a couple of elements that you invest in to kind of make them differentiated, but it's not about the program. So when you're in college and you learn about price, place, promotion, etc., the answer to the 4P question has always been place, and that's my bottom one. So what companies get wrong, and big companies, trillion-dollar companies that I talk to get wrong, is they spend way too much time in the boardroom thinking they're one program element away from getting this market. They're one price point away from winning this market. They're one Super Bowl ad promotion away from winning this market. And what they all forget is if those 35 people in the boardroom got on some airplanes, got into some key podcasts, got into media conversations with you, and started investing more in your community, that's where the answer is. So they're out of tens of millions of people, last year we hit 335,000 partners who have at least one managed contract. If you're to take those 335,000 companies and ask them what they read, what they listen to, where they go, and who they follow, simple questions, you get back a list of media organizations. You get list that 218 events. You get a list of 100 plus podcasts, 143 social groups. There's 67 associations they might be members of. But if you go around, there's 14 spheres that influence them. When in March they got asked about Gen AI, they had to quickly go educate themselves. They went to these trusted sources. And there's only about 1,000 trusted sources total.
It's when you look at the challenge, right, for vendors in general, right? It seems to me, just to kind of wrap up this segment, is that they're disconnect between the needs of the humans now, right? They're just brute force. Here's my top 10 things why we are great. They hammer these home, and somehow there's a disconnect with the word need. Does anybody really need this stuff? Like, what are they going to need it to do? Why do they need you? Why the hell you matter? Who are you? That type of thing. And I think maybe the channel folks just start to get into the game of understanding needs a little bit better. What's your take around the word need?
Well, the need changed in 2023. Another massive trend, going back 40 years. The first trend is demographics. One is our buyer by the end of next year, by the end of 2024, will be a millennial.
Right.
That's by quantity and by budget. So we've now done a generational shift. One of the pieces of psychology, behavioral research, the journey research that goes on around millennials is they think it's a team sport. They're one of these people that love the group of 7 around them, but they're also integration first. So above price, service, support, brand reputation, any of the criteria that you'd have in the past, you got to work well in their environment first. So don't talk about how great you are. Talk about how great you plug into what they're doing and work in their sandbox. They'll buy something today that is 80% as good as the competitor if it works better in their environment. That's the big change.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge sometimes to kind of educate everybody how to play that, but but you're right. I think it's a lot of education to kind of get them to synchronize with what's happening with the actual channel community itself, and sometimes it feels like there are ships passing, in this ocean, and they're not quite connecting. But hopefully they'll get it better. I want to touch a bit on cybersecurity. And then wrap up with maybe some predictions of what you think is going to happen in 24. But for 23, people are talking ecosystems, as you predicted. We're talking about how do we, get to being one of those 7 partners at the table. I think that makes sense. And I think a lot of people are talking about subscription models. And so the trends are sort of moving along in that path. Was there anything that we predicted that that didn't come true or morphed into something for 23? Then we'll jump into cyber.
That's a good question. I think a lot of those trends are building. I don't think generative AI, or I don't think any of the things that changed in the world shifted people away from this idea of subscription consumption models and marketplaces and ecosystems. And we've seen pretty constant drumbeat that's accelerating. And every survey that we see, those numbers are accelerating. We never made a prediction about a specific number. That, NVIDIA would become $1 trillion valued company. That would have been a great prediction.
Yeah.
We didn't make it. But I will make the prediction that NVIDIA will not be $1 trillion company when we have this conversation next December.
Really?
Yeah. That everybody who builds chips today, saw that they missed, that GPU being the heart and soul of generative AI. Everybody's made announcements to go and attack that market. And even some of the big companies like Apple and Amazon and others and Google are building their own chips. So while they got that early lead, if you look at their revenues and you look at their prospects in a competitive market, they're definitely not $1 trillion company. So whether you have an RRSP or a 401k or wherever you are, just, be careful on some of these things that get run up that fast.
I'm making a note. So, I mean, obviously, NVIDIA has been doing a lot of noise in the marketplace with AWS and what they're doing with everybody. It seems like they're exclusive with everybody, but they're in bed with everybody at some point. But it's interesting because, with AI, they seem to be at the right time, at the right place because of that computing power. And from what I saw was that they're able to reduce the consumption of energy and the output is multiple times better. So it seems like that's sort of where everybody needs to go because these things are sucking a lot of power, right?
Yeah, I sold PCs for 17 years, and one of the 11 components that we would put on inside the system was the graphics processing unit.
Hmm.
Whether it was on a cheaper machine, just included on the Intel chip, whether on the outside it was a Canadian ATI or an
Hmm.
NVIDIA or something like that. I mean, 5% of our machines had an NVIDIA chip. I mean, I think we bought the chip for $5. It was always at that time just kind of another layer that didn't get a lot of play unless you're a particular gamer or unless you're a particular workstation buyer that was building a certain application on Autodesk or something like that. But now this little $5 chip has become this $1 trillion company because generative AI is not a traditional linear processing model that works well in CPUs. It's not a bunch of zeros and ones. On the other side, it's not quantum computing, a bunch of qubits. It's better processed in a graphical processor unit that can handle, multiple streams. And so that winner, and they happen to have the technology shipping and all these big arrangements that you said, all these big partnerships were just, again, monopoly power. These big companies putting up big, commitments against NVIDIA and really, from a capitalism point of view, sewering some of the competition because no one at the next tier could afford any of these chips or were in line for them anyway if they could. So
Interesting.
that's kind of the market, the dynamic as we have it today. But when there's 10 different chips from 10 different companies that can do this, in varying degrees of success, it's going to be a different market.
That was a good competition as well because somebody's got to figure this stuff out. And look at Apple chips. I mean, I would have never thought that Apple's going to make their own chips, but damn, that thing is crazy fast. But I will jump off my pay grade of chips, which I'm not qualified to talk about. But so just want to touch a bit on cybersecurity and then squeeze in a few predictions for 2024. So cybersecurity obviously is the elephant in the room. The world's getting clobbered by it 24/7. We jumped in there with our own cybersecurity defense ecosystem play to help save the world a little bit. And the reality is that every MSP out there has got to be playing in this space, right? Every company has to have a cybersecurity game, playbook, because it's sort of getting serious, right? I mean, these things have a lot of teeth and so on, and we've seen all the big headlines and so on. And there's so many. I mean, I was only tracking maybe about 4,000 or 5,000 of these companies, right? And really, honestly, maybe 1,800 is what I've actually spoken to. I haven't gotten to the rest yet. But now there's more and there's more and there's more growing. And quite honestly, they all sound great. The marketing has taken over because the investments are billions of dollars. I think last month there was 600 million that was invested in that community just in that month alone. So a lot of investments, a lot of growth, a lot of expansion happening. What's going on in cyber?
Yeah, so here we'll start with a prediction. So
Yeah.
2024 will be the year of the platform. Every other part of tech, every other category has basically large players. I mean, you go anywhere in the world, there's three kinds of car manufacturers in the US. There's three kinds of refrigerators. There's every industry kind of boils down. It used to be Jack Welch at GE used to say, if you're not number one or two in your market, get out of it. Well, in tech, it's kind of 1 through 5. If you sell to marketing buyers, for example, there were 5 platform winners in that decade of marketing before ecosystem. You had Marketo and Eloqua, you had Pardot that went to Salesforce, you had HubSpot and Acton. So this idea of, who's going to be those 5 winning platforms in security. Today, we have 6,500 tool makers. And today, the average deal is 7 layers to get to zero trust or SASE or whatever model the customer is thinking about. And partners have been the kind of stitching together of tools is one of their big roles. The way platforms work differently, and we talked about the power of platforms from a monopoly perspective and the economics of platforms, but as bigger companies become that foundational layer of where the other 6 in that stack integrate and share data and APIs, and it becomes a cohesive thing, is where the integration first buyer wants to be. And then a bunch of M&A this year to make up what those, at least 4 out of the 5 were pretty convinced. We had the Cisco Splunk deal announced this year, and that's going to close pretty quickly. That's going to be one of the platforms. You've got that big alliance partnership between CrowdStrike, Zscaler, and Okta. And each of those companies are growing gangbuster. Many of them growing by triple digits in terms of their growth year over year. You've got Microsoft, who's kind of snuck up the middle by giving away their software a long time, but they're a top 5 player and growing, significantly. You have the strength of Palo Alto, going backwards. You've got big players, the Fortinets of the world and Trend Micros of the world. So you got this set of, bigger companies now, and they're setting themselves up as these platforms where they're going to have marketplaces. They're going to have these integrations. They're going to have this strategy for a customer where you start in, at a certain layer and build on it. If you're a sales buyer, you start with a Salesforce or a HubSpot Dynamics. We talked about marketing buyers. If you're a CX buyer, you start with ServiceNow. If you're HR, you start with Workday. And then you build on top of it, those 7 layers. That's where security is going to be in 2024. Customers are going to have to make, with partners who sell 91% of all security, they're going to have to make these platform decisions. Am I a Microsoft shop? Am I a Cisco Splunk shop? Am I a CrowdStrike shop? Palo shop? You got to make that decision first. Then all the other 6,500 tool makers are going to have to make sure they integrate well, not only into that platform, but with everyone else in the other 6 layers.
It is a challenge. And as I dug into the cybersecurity world, I realized that when you get into this world, it's quite extraordinary. The amount of brain power that is in this world is incredible. And honestly, it just feels like there's this good versus evil, playbook that's never really in the IT industry, but it's really alive and well in cyber. And evil hackers, and the bad actors, they feel they're winning, and they are in many, many ways. And the good folks trying to figure this out. And now we're leveraging AI in the middle of this battlefield. And it's quite extraordinary to see, how it's going to pan out. But then we're both on the same page. I think cyber is one of those things that everybody's got to get their feet wet in, and to make sure that they're actually spinning up some good stuff.
There's an equal amount of brain power on the evil side than there is on the good side. There's this balance of power.
Yeah.
And when we all thought in March, hey, this ChatGPT is cool, and we're having it, interview at Google and get the job, and we're, having it write the bar exam, we're all doing that stuff. These people are knee deep in generative AI, rethinking how phishing is going to work. Hey, Julian, how's it going? Saw you talk to Jay this morning. This weekend you're planning to do that. Hope everything is okay with you personally. Saw that you had a little bit of an issue there. And by the way, wanted to make sure I had this. Click here. You're reading this, and it's, by the way, coming from one of your friends.
Absolutely.
In the response, phishing just completely changes with generative AI when you can read the internet cover to cover and come back. And I had a chance, in my career to work a lot with AI. When I was, joining, I'm 2 weeks away from my 30-year anniversary of working in the channel.
Congrats in advance.
At IBM in Calgary, they were looking for a futurist. And they were working on 3 things. One was a personal area network where you shook hands, and that was enough data in 1994 transferred on your Palm Pilot for a business card. So you could go into a event and shake hands, and you'd walk away with every business card electronically through the electricity in your body.
Mm-hmm.
That was PAN. Second was they just certified teleportation. 8,000 page report, it's possible. Beam me up, Scotty, was possible sometime in the future. And third, we were just about to pay this guy, this grandmaster named Gary Kasparov at chess.
Mm-hmm.
We're building this system called Deep Blue.
Mm-hmm.
And we think we have the compute power as of 1995, 1996. We have the computing power to play out a game of chess, every possible permutation backwards and forwards between the time you have to make a move. So every time your opponent makes a move, you could play out the game every possible way and choose the best outcome on every move. There's no way a human could beat that. A human could only move maybe 3 moves ahead, which Gary was at that time. Computer can play every move ahead. So in 1996, that was the first AI, was brute force AI. And it wasn't AI, it was just compute. We could outcompute the human brain. But 15 years later, well, actually, it wasn't quite 15, but 13 or 14 years later, started a new project, which is the Jeopardy project. This was the first generative AI product. So it was a dual problem. One is you had to play against Ken Jennings and the best humans ever at Jeopardy. Alex Trebek was there. You get asked the question, or you get, put the answer up on the board. You're given milliseconds to figure out whether, given a little bit more time, you're going to know the answer. So in those milliseconds, it's almost like doing a Google search and having a confidence interval. If I'm at a 0.9, I'm going to press the button or I'm not. And then you're given, when you win the buzzer, you're given 3 or 4 more seconds to frame your question back. In that 4 seconds, can I go back to that search, read the internet cover to cover, the first 20, 30, 40 Google search results, and then in a generative way, ask it in a human question back. And so by that time, and this was 13 years ago, I mean, that computer beat humans at a generative AI game.
I remember seeing it.
And so those were the 2 monumental moments in my career working at IBM that were AI, and being a futurist at the company, those were my moments. And now we're living through this moment, in general terms.
But Jay, well, how come, IBM was with Watson way ahead of the game, right? And yet ChatGPT comes up from left and, just blindsides the game. I mean, you would have thought that they would have been the first with ChatGPT out of the gate, right? If they've got that skill set, right, that they've been baking up for so many decades, right? What do you think happened to IBM? Did they fall asleep at the wheel?
They made a critical partnership error. They made a channel error. So one of the things they did is being a product company, they productized AI. And so they put up SKUs that said, hey, this SKU is going to cure cancer. This SKU is going to predict nuclear explosions. This SKU is going to predict the weather. We just bought the Weather Channel to support it with data. And, we're going to skew those up at TD SYNNEX and Ingram and go purchase them. AI is not a product, will never be a product. It's a feature. It's a feature inside every one of the software products, hundreds of thousands of software products. It'll be a feature inside your toothbrush, inside your car, inside everything. So while IBM was skewing it up as a product, getting the sales force out to sell it, a bunch of hospitals, Duke and UNC bought it to cure cancer. 10 years later, there's an expose on New York Times that it probably delayed the cure of cancer because the doctors were relying too much on it. So it was actually a negative, not a positive. It wasn't a product. It was a co-pilot. Should have been a co-pilot and should have been integrated with all their other stuff to help cure cancer.
We may be
different niche, different, nuance here.
Absolutely.
But everybody who's, loading it up as a product, like Microsoft Copilot or Salesforce Einstein GPT, it's going to fail as a product, the $5 adder, and it's going to be a feature within 2 years. There's a prediction.
There you go.
Integrated in everything. So that was the mistake Watson made. They should have spent the time, instead of skewing it up at distribution, selling it as a product, they should have been at Tesla, getting it inside that car. They should have been at Salesforce Tower, getting it there so Salesforce didn't build Einstein. They should have been everywhere, from your toothbrush to your car and everything in between. They should have been at those companies. white labeling, embedding, integrating into those solutions.
Find those humans that made that error. I mean, these are things that happen. We've seen it with, Nortel. We've seen it with, BlackBerry. We've seen a lot of big organizations stumble and fall. Maybe we need a new acronym for IBM. But in the old days, it was IBM stands for I bought Mac, and now maybe we need something else for AI. I want to just wrap this up with just talking. I'm just going to say a few of the tech things that's happening out there, and you give me a short answer about what you think, prediction of what's going to happen, if it's a good thing, bad thing, or you think it's going to just fizz out in 2024. I'll just give the first one, AI, a free pass, because I think that's just going to be crazy moving forward. Cybersecurity, we talked about a lot, so we think that's going to be huge as well. RPA, I mean, there's still a lot of talk about RPA and digitization. Where is that going to be in 2024?
Well, RPA, there's a huge threat via generative AI.
Right.
So generative AI creates code, and it's getting better at creating code to the point where every MSP, every ISV, every SI, everyone that's a tech services company, the millions that I showed you above my shoulder,
Yep,
will be custom development shops. Will convert workflows and processes and business logic into code immediately by having conversational type of connection to these generative AI systems. This is what RPA promised to do previously, was drag and drop, no code, low code type of idea, and create this world. But it's also a feature. It's not a product. There should be those business logic, those workflow engines built into everything we do. So we're running Salesforce and we want to, create some sort of multi-step workflow. It should be drag and drop. I mean, it shouldn't be its own product. So while I'm not predicting the end of that industry, I'm predicting that there's going to be a convergence here with the bigger language models and things like that. And generating code in the future is going to be purely a digital, thing.
I think you and I could probably generate code in the future. I'll see. I don't know about your skill sets in programming, but I think it's looks pretty easy to me. But anyway, for now with AI, so AI is going to probably eat a bit of the lunch of RPA. What about IoT? I mean, we've been talking about that thing forever, and the damn thing, maybe with 5G and the proliferation of that, that infrastructure is going to change it. What do you think is going to happen with IoT in 2024?
Yeah, when we did our comparison, we asked all the partners around the world what they thought of generative AI. A third of them were very, very skeptical and, taking a wait and see. And it's because they lived through an IoT moment. They lived through last year, the metaverse moment, and they've lived through every moment in between. Every product on every Gartner hype cycle. While, sounds life-changing, the partners couldn't really monetize it. And IoT was one of these hard things. And IoT is everywhere. It's growing. It's, revolutionary. Having everything be smart is creating these big data models and data lakes that create these language models. I mean, the entire thing is there, but it's another embedded technology in your portfolio. It's not its own thing. And so when you're thinking through a customer 7-layer solution, one or two of those layers may be at that level. That marketing solution may have a beacon. That smart city solution might have, certain sensors and cameras and things like that. But in the end, what was the promise of IoT, this huge new opportunity, make millions of dollars in IoT, didn't come out. And the same thing about metaverse last year. The big promise of, virtual VR, MR, AR, and, how that's going to change. Well, no, I mean, that wasn't the partner opportunity. And out of the gate, generative AI is not this big $4 trillion opportunity like Microsoft says. It's not really a VAR MSP opportunity, probably for the first 18 months, other than selling some more, routers and a bit more storage and a bit more, work. It's not the big billion-dollar idea that you should be shutting down the rest of your business and going all in.
Yeah, it's just another component, right? I mean, there's a lot of moving parts. But yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. It's plugged into everything, right? Quantum. I mean, we know it's not here yet, but sort of like they're coming. And I see that a lot of folks that's been stealing data realize that, wait a minute, I could just keep this data for a bit. And when quantum becomes real, then I could just, spin it through and decrypt it, and boom, I'll get you in the future. What's your take on quantum in 24?
Yeah, it'll be another compute platform.
Mm,
It won't be a big channel opportunity again because there's very narrow use cases for it.
mm,
But the fact of the matter is, we talked earlier about linear compute through a CPU, like turning
mm,
on zeros and ones faster and faster than ever before.
mm,
The second part was that GPU thinking, which is a little bit different. It's a multi-lane highway coming in and being able to do multi-threading better, which is a
mm.
generative AI story. And then, doing qubits is different than that. It's when you're thinking nonlinear. And there's so many different, security obviously being one of them, but there's so many areas where have a nonlinear compute. And, at quantum level, that's going to solve bigger problems. But again, I go back to the day in and day out things that we're billing customers for. And unless
Yeah, it's
you're
just not
calling
there.
on specific universities or specific federal government use cases, the
Mm.
general population serving the general market is not going to have, for the first 10 years of quantum computing, is probably not going to have a huge multi-billion-dollar opportunity.
Well, when I tell MSPs about how they can leverage quantum computing today, is really just a fear factor icon, which is that, look, if your data gets stolen, whether they release it or not today, because you think you're protected because encrypted, at some point down the road, when quantum computing becomes available, then there goes your data and all your secrets and so on. So be fearful, don't let your data out of your hands type thing. So maybe that's the only play for these folks today. Um, a few others, augmented reality. I mean, we're starting to see people get, it's starting to pick up a little bit with all the various goggles that's been, coming out there. Do you see that as a channel play for 24?
I see it as a play, but
Mm,
it won't be a channel play. I mean, there's not millions of dollars of consulting, design, architecture, implementation, integration.
mm,
Apple will have their product live in 2024 at $3,500. The first iteration, I mean, it'll sell out. It'll be an iteration for travelers like us,
mm.
when you don't have to look at that little screen in front of you on the airplane, where you
Yeah,
can immerse yourself in beautiful sound and a
good
huge
earphones.
window of a movie, and you're going to cover your eyes on a plane, which is going to be perfect. Uh, Maybe when we're in a hotel room working on a spreadsheet that's miles wide and stuff. I mean, there's a few use cases, mostly consumer at this point.
Mm,
So no, the AR, VR, MR,
mm.
again, it's narrow. It's like IoT again. If you're calling on the right customers and there's the right use cases for augmented or mixed reality or things like that, you're going to find opportunities. But for, again, a general market player who's calling on all the small and medium businesses around town, this is not going to be on the front of your slide deck on, what they should be thinking.
It'll be cool though if you give away
It's
everybody
cool.
a goggles, right? Yeah. I'm not going to go through all the other stuff. There's so many things with mobility and 3D printing, nanotechnology, and a whole bunch of other technologies. But there's one I want to jump to as the last one. I've been hearing a lot about bots and the way AI is kind of like making them into a thing now, particularly with customer service help desks and things like this. And it seems to me a lot of call centers could be impacted by bots and so on. Do you see we're finally in the era of the new bot, that's actually smart and not frustrating little devices that you encounter in people's websites?
I mean, this is a trend that will work. The reason is there's a couple trends. The millennial buyer I mentioned, and I'm one of
Yeah,
these buyers, by the way, that
yeah,
would rather not work with a human through all 28 moments.
yeah.
People that are making $1 million decisions and trying to avoid salespeople. It's now 75% of buyers
Mm,
would rather avoid human contact, like a sales process.
mm,
75%. So we're in this world now that the smarter that bots can get, and I needed to ingest, every service ticket. I needed to ingest every knowledge base. So these language models are important, and I need to get access to the edge. So, the consumer knowledge is one thing, but I needed to get into that business and rip through every one of its applications. read Salesforce cover to cover, read Marketo cover to cover. And once I've got through all their business data, and that bot is now generally intelligent, as a consumer, whether I have a problem or whether I have a marketing sales opportunity, I need them to be smarter. And we're I think 18 months away from that magic moment where you're asking them really technical questions and they're going across billions of different scenarios and they're picking out the ones that are the right ones. I used to be a call center agent. I used to be in that help desk. And I could absolutely see in this as kind of life-changing, but it's not a product. It's going to be sold through the CCaaS, UCaaS, and other solutions that already serve those call centers. It's going to be an extension of whatever Five9 or whatever product they buy that's going to be integrated with these key Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and other language models. And it's going to be this feature that just goes from that little bot on the side, cheap and cheerful and doesn't help you at all, to just getting smarter and smarter every time you go back.
The other day I was thinking, I'm going to have my bot call your bot. I could see
next year it won't be us. It'll be just our bots talking.
Yeah, it'll be a deep fake bot that actually, does this stuff. I could see that happening. I'll have my bot call your bot and set up something.
Just wait for the 2024 US election on deep fakes.
Oh my goodness.
The risk against Meta, the risk against, X, the risk against TikTok. I mean, when you see the opposing or your candidate, up there talking, the general population that doesn't understand deep fakes, this is going to be earth moving in terms of the impact it has on politics going forward. And I think that everybody's gearing up for 2024 as the first foray into what this could. Fake news was 4 years ago.
This is now deep fake news.
This is now deep fake news.
The feels wrapping this up, Jay. It's like it's like an assault on mankind, humankind. That unless you actually have some filters put up, you're going to get hurt. And getting hurt it seems to me, becoming much easier with social engineering from the bad actors. The things I've seen, it almost makes me want to, lock my doors and unplug the internet. But, the reality is that we are here and we all got to face these things. And I think the channel for me is the front lines of the tech war or world, whatever you want to call it. And so the more we can educate them about how they can actually go out there to their customers and help protect them and move them along, for me is the mission, the only mission, to make them bigger, better, stronger, and smarter. I'll leave you with the last word, Jay. Did I forget to say and ask you a question that I should have maybe asked, or how would you like to wrap this up? What's your last words for everybody for 2024?
This industry is growing. We're in macro challenges. We've got two major conflicts in Europe and the Middle East. So many things, inflation and everything else. For the first time, in 14 years, we don't have free money. We're not on this, rocket ship ride as an industry. But I'll tell you, if you go back to 2008 and 2001, the two previous major downturns, the technology industry took the world out of recession. And it was partners who drive 73.1% of that are on the tip of the spear. And every survey we do and every question we ask, are you investing more in marketing? Are you hiring more people, as vendors have laid off 489,000 people this year? Are you hiring? Partners are more optimistic than any other audience in the world, any other industry. And we're going to do it again. Partners are going to lead the tech industry. The tech industry is going to lead the world out of this. And in later 2024, we're going to be back, I think, on the rocket ship.
I'm all in with you, man. It's amazing. I think I totally agree with you. I think the channel is the place to be. And it's interesting that it just never gets boring. So always a pleasure, Jay, and talking with you and catching up. And again, of course, we'll do this in 2024 again, see how we did. But before then, we'll talk and keep everybody posted. Take care. All the best. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas and all the usual stuff, man.
You too. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.